Hey, how's it, Roger?
Hi, Patrick. How you doing?
Hey, yeah, good man. So here we are, number three of practicing in public, our pressure tested podcast.
Correct, Patrick. So this time it's your turn, kind of in the hot seat, and yeah, I'd really like to just spend some time, finding out more about you. We've had some incredible adventures together. We've been in some pretty tight spots, but yeah, I still actually know very little about you. So let's just fire away. I mean, we were born in the same town, right? Were you born in Durban, or just give me a little bit of
Yeah,
your.
I was born in Durban. It was a Wednesday, uh, many years ago when boats were still made of wood. A long time ago. Yeah, I was born and bred in Durban, and I lived in Durban until I was 18 years old. Went to school in Durban, grew up in Durban, and although the sea wasn't probably as big as influence as it was on you, the sea was always there. We would always go to the beach on a weekend, but I was more on the surface on the beach, and I did a bit of fishing. As you grow up in Durban, there was always you'd sort of get the fever. My father would say, "Come the shadow biting," and we'd grab the rods and go down to Virginia Beach or somewhere like that and cast a line. And I remember the very first fish I ever caught in the sea was I'd done a cast and it went straight up into the air and plonked into the waves. I'm like, oh damn it! Try to reel it in, and I caught a sizable grunter that was feeding right there. And I'm like, wow, who would have thought? You're always trying to cast it out so deep. So the ocean was always there, but I don't think it shaped or formed me initially as it did for you.
Interesting. Your Yeah, what I mean, just in terms of your formative years, what kind of sports were you playing? I mean, we grew up in an era where, it was very old school compared to today's kind of world. But I mean, sports were quite a thing. I mean, I don't think people have seen us side by side. We need to share a picture. But I mean, you're a pretty big unit. I mean, were you into rugby? What kind of sports did you
But
play?
I played every sport there was, Roger. I didn't play rugby initially because my mother was like, "You're not playing rugby." So in junior school, I didn't play rugby, but I played everything else. I played cricket and basketball, swimming, chess. I got Natal School's colours for chess. And so I suppose that makes your mom happy when you're doing the intelligent types of sports. Um, but then I got to high school and they were like, okay, we're dealing everybody out who's playing what sport. And I'm like, oh, what do I do now? Do I go to the chess club? And I remember one of the teachers looking at me, he's like, you there, rugby. And I sat in the group that was going to play rugby. And I'm like, oh, what am I going to tell my mother? And I actually didn't tell my mother for the first couple of weeks. I attended rugby practice, told her I was doing hockey, and so started rugby in my hockey boots. And then it got to a stage after a couple of weeks when we were practicing. We hadn't done any games yet. I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to admit that I'm playing rugby. And so I did, and yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it. So rugby was the main sport I played right up to matric. Played uh, first team rugby. Really loved the rugby, but I played cricket, I played hockey, I played basketball, did swimming. So yeah, there was always sport. There was more sport than anything. Sport was 6 days of the week. I was doing some sort of sport, and a little bit of schoolwork in the background. And
So
yeah,
yeah, so I mean, I remember we pretty much the same age. So at that time, conscription was a necessity when you left school. I elected to go to university, and by the time I'd actually left university, conscription was no longer a necessity. I don't know if I told you this, but I actually nearly signed up for permanent force Navy divers, which is a whole nother story. But I'm intrigued to know what your sort of thinking was and what happened after school.
so yeah, as you said, conscript was still compulsory, and so when I went into to the army. It initially was 2 years, but in that time when it was a 2 years bit, it got changed to 1 years. And so I I rocked up at a train station in Cape Town. I was living in Cape Town then, at Wynberg military base, and climbed on a train, not knowing where I was going, and spent, I don't know how many hours. We felt like 24 hours on a train ride to Grahamstown, where I did my basic training in Grahamstown, which was 6 weeks. And at the end of the 6 weeks, there was sort of a selection committee, and I got selected to go and do officers training in Oudtshoorn, an infantry school. So again, it was back onto a train and off to Oudtshoorn. And though I didn't realize then how that training would shape me and form me. That was 44 weeks of officers training, junior leadership. And then it was just on the back of the end of the Angolan war, but the training was incredible. It was so intense. I mean, I think I ran for 44 weeks. I can remember the corporal shouting, if your feet are touching the ground, you're losing speed, type of thing. And it was, and especially being English in the South African Defence Force in those years, that was just, that was something different. And those days in the army, I remember the corporal saying to us, in Afrikaans, it was like, we 1 month is English month, 1 month is Afrikaans month, but we're not going to do like that. We'll do 50% Afrikaans, 50% English. So for the next 10 years, we're doing Afrikaans. The next 10 years, we'll do English. So, I had to adapt quickly and, learn Afrikaans, and I did. And I must say, I really thoroughly enjoyed my military training. I was also playing rugby. The rugby was coming on nicely, and so being in the army and playing rugby was a great place to be, because in those early 90s, um, um, rugby wasn't professional sport. You didn't get paid to play rugby, and so it was a great place to play rugby. And I did my training there. I played for it was Southwestern Districts was where Oudtshoorn was, and then I finished my training, became a one pip lieutenant, and got selected to stay behind at infantry school as an instructor, which was great, because I was training then future leaders, and I got selected to train the permanent force intake. So the guys who were already permanent force looking to become officers, which was quite an accolade, because that was sort of the best of the best type of thing. But that really shaped and formed some of my leadership and some of the decisions I make, and how I think and act under pressure, because you're really put into situations in that type of context. And remember, that was the early 90s. South Africa there was a different place to what it was now. Um, South Africa was sort of, there were talks of coming out of apartheid. There were lots of political parties that were fighting each other. There was a lot of violence, a lot of political violence in South Africa at that stage. And so I I I got conscripted. Initially it was 2 years, but then it shifted to 1 year while I was busy with my first year. And they offered people to stay on for an extra year, and they called it short service. If you opted to stay on for a second year, you could stay on for a second year. You got a signing up bonus at the beginning of it, and a signing up bonus if you stayed the year. And so that's what I did. I was playing rugby, enjoying what I was doing. I then got transferred to Cape Town. Then it was the SACC, South African Cape Coloured Corps, based at Eersterivier, sort of halfway between Somerset West and Cape Town. And I was there up until 1998. Served a couple of years as short service, kortdienst as it was called, and then signed up for permanent force. I was really doing it, and I really believed I was making a difference, and I was. I had a good company of troops. We were all over South Africa, deployed all over South Africa during the transition 1994 period. We had the peacekeeping force come in, the UN forces come in, and I was part of that. And we were deployed to make sure the elections were free and fair. And then post that, there was still a lot of political violence going on, and the army was deployed in different roles throughout South Africa. There was a lot of gangsterism and drugs and things like that in the Cape Flats. So we were deployed in the Cape Flats to help, curb the gang violence. Um, I was deployed in Richmond, which was a big political hot seat, a lot of political infighting, and there was, we would search houses and do patrols, and the weapons and ammunition we found was incredible. I remember searching one household, and we'd find 81 millimeter mortars and uh, ammunition and weapons that you couldn't believe. And it got to a stage. It was 1998 where we were doing a patrol in Mannenberg, and there were two sets of gangs, which were the hard livings and the Americans, and we were trying to keep the peace between these two gangs. And I was sort of in a field in between sort of two sets of hostiles, speaking to a police colonel, and we were talking about the rugby. South Africa was playing the Springboks on a Saturday. This was late on a Friday evening, and you know, I saw this sort of red laser pointer on on his chest as we were talking. It was just getting dark, and quite often, those laser pointers just come out. So people would out of the windows point these laser pointers at you or in your eyes. And so, I sort of saw this red laser pointer like you sort of see in the movies. And I don't know what, I just pushed him. I'm like, Johan, his name was Johan. And I pushed him, Johan. And as I pushed him, suddenly all hell broke loose, all the shooting. And I dived down onto the road, and it was a pavement about this high, the curb. And I sort of lay there behind the curb, had my 9 mil out. The troops had gone off, and I, you know, firing back, not sure who I was firing at. I lay there and I just thought to myself, sheesh, I'm trying to help this community, I'm trying to help these people. And that stage I had a young family, and here I'm being shot at, and you know when the bullet's going over your head. And that next day, after the finished that evening, I went into my commanding officer's office, and I'm like, Colonel, that's it, I'm done, I'm out of here. And so that was it. But I left as a captain. I really did enjoy that time in the Defence Force. I helped train the non-statutory forces being integrated into the new South African National Defence Force. Went on a lot of courses to help facilitate that transition, and so those years were really formative in how I even do things today. My wife will quite often say to me, "Oh, that you're so very militaristic." I get up every morning, make the bed, make sure it's all squared away. My cupboard's neat. I can iron, I can sew, I can polish my shoes. All the sort of skills that you learn to the army that almost lacking today. That people don't do. I know. As much as I'd love to get my kids to iron, I can't really force them to iron. But you know, it's something that was just drilled into you, and it becomes second nature.
Pat, just to unpack that a bit, I mean, so you would have been dealing with, I mean, there was a big multiracial squad, right? You weren't, I mean, initially it might have been, initially I know in the army there were certainly, well, I mean, was always multiracial, but I'm assuming you got incredible experience dealing with like diversity, leadership across all different racial groups. And yeah, I think it's quite incredible. And I'm interested in the leadership. I mean, the leadership training, was it, what, just unpack that a little bit, because it's almost,
So that initial 44 weeks in Oudtshoorn is that they're teaching you to become an officer in the South African Defence Force, and it was very much break you down, push you to your absolute limit until your body collapses, but your mind is stronger than that, and then building you up again. And that really was how it was done. And I mean, as you say, in those years, the majority or national service was done by white people. White people had to go and do national service. That was what it was like in 1990. There were other units that were of other color. So when I left infantry or moved from infantry school to Cape Town, I joined the South African Cape Colored Corps, which was just people from from Cape Town who were from that community. There was, there were officers that were from the community, but traditionally officers in those years were white. But then things changed rather rapidly. Come 1992, 93, things were changing. Nelson Mandela was freed, um, and we started to get the integration of the non-statutory forces. So the South African Defence Force then became, very very multicultural, um, and the I'll never forget one of my first deployments was up to Walvis Bay, and then we went to a base called Roy. I can't remember, near June 7. Roy something bosses, and we were there to help bring all the equipment and the tanks and the rifles and all of that. We were standing guard, and growing up as a South African, we always warned of the Roy Gevaar. Communism was invading, and that's why we had the war in Angola, and there we were loading things onto to Russian ships because communism had fallen, and it was all about the money. The people who submitted the lowest price got the tender, and so there we were, shipping rifles and tanks and buffels and you name it onto Russian ships to be transported, back down to South Africa. But but it's not just leading men. There is that cultural thing. Obviously, when you put on a uniform, and the idea behind wearing a uniform is it makes everybody the same, but we're not all the same. And there were definitely cultural differences that you had to deal with. Um, when you're dealing with certain cultures, you've got to be aware of how that cultural setup is. So when somebody's needing pass, or says they need to go and visit their family, it's not just climbing on a bus or getting in a taxi. Going to see their family is somewhere in the rural area in a farm, and you need to allow an extra 2 or 3 days travel just because how remote it is. So it's that understanding and having that empathy that besides just the do it like this military style, you had to have also that empathy and understanding as a military leader. And yeah, I commanded troops, and but I think they enjoyed following me. I was always fair. I was always straight down the line with them, and they appreciated that. So I really really had a good camaraderie in the unit I was in, and the company I was in.
And was there explicit, I mean, you spoke about them breaking you down and then building up, but that's as an individual. Was there explicit management training around how to manage people, how to lead, how to, or was it relatively
There
rudimentary?
was. I mean, there were handbooks on everything. So there was a handbook on how to be an officer. How to eat, how to use your cutlery, how to attend a formal dinner. So the detail was all there. It was well, officers formative training, and so it was all broken down into detail as to how you manage everything from law. There was military law courses, how to do summary trials, how to do discipline. So yeah, the training was phenomenal. I mean, there is nothing that I've done subsequently that trained me and gave me the foundational knowledge that I have than those 8 years that I was in the army.
Just
It really was good foundational training.
okay. Great. So, I mean, that's a really great kind of overview. Again, something I had no idea of, but it all starts to make sense and it certainly adds up. But what happened after that? So now you've just to recap a bit, you've been essentially in the military for 8, 9 years, 7, 8,
Eight
9 years.
years, yeah,
You're now around about 26, 27. So
correct.
what do you do?
I left the army, and at that stage they were looking at reducing the numbers in the army. So we had the ability to take a severance package, which I took, and actually moved back to Durban. Having lived in Cape Town, moved back to Durban and opened up a bottle store with the money. In those years in South Africa, alcohol wasn't sold from supermarkets or anything like that. It had to be a dedicated store, and
So
so
just hang on, let me stop you there. Like, let me unpack that. So what, you know what I mean? What was it that led you to it's very entrepreneurial. It's what was the thinking process behind that? I mean, do you have a history? Did your family used to sell alcohol? Or
No, not at all. I think Roger, I always had that sort of entrepreneurial spirit. When I was at school, I had aviaries. I had in the back garden. I built a whole lot of aviaries in the back garden in the house growing up, and I used to collect finches, Australian finches, and breed them and sell them. And I had one aviary that was just full of a little bird called zebra finches, and they just breed like you cannot believe. And sort of once a month, I'd go in there with the net, catch a shoebox full of zebra finches, take it off to the pet shop, sell the veggies, the zebra finches for bird seed, and eventually I had really people were contacting me from all over because I had really specific. The one set was these star finches, bright red head, beautiful finches, and I was really successful in breeding with star finches. And so, selling them for a lot of money as they had, as the breeding pairs had babies. Um, and so I think that selling was always there. My father was always in corporate. He was always in corporate, MD at Coral Brick, which was one of the big, brick factories. So there wasn't so much an entrepreneurial thing, but I think, you know, I, I think just coming from that rigid structure, probably of the defense laws, it probably would have suited going into a corporate environment. But I enjoyed the freedom of being an entrepreneur, and so moved from the army into the bottle store. My father was living in Durban then and helped find some businesses that were looking for a business, helped us with the search. And yeah, we found the bottle store, and that was it. Jumped in and started that. And that sort of led to other things, having the bottle store in Umhlanga, which is a touristy place. I'd have people coming in asking, oh, we're looking to do a safari, looking to do a trip, looking to do this. Do you know of something? And so that led to forming a tour company called Utola Tours, which we then, started and started taking people on trips and tours because, you sort of identify that there are opportunities that you can jump into. And I think that's probably the thing is you've got to be brave sometimes. You just got to say, I'm making this decision. I'm going to do it. And that was it. Not knowing anything about the touring business, I, suddenly had to go and do tour guiding courses and NCF qualifications and whatever it may be. And I got my badge as a tour guide and, started taking people on tours and did some real cool off-road adventure stuff. We linked up with Kingsley Holgate, who's sort of the African explorer. We had Land Rovers, and we did real adventurous off-road exploring. And people could bring their own cars with, or they could come in our cars. And we did real adventure stuff. And that probably links back to my army days.
and this
And
is
then
just give me a time frame again. Just give me some sense of what years is this now?
so this was from 1998 till about 2005. That was happening. Um, I had a mate who had Kodak Express shops, so also got involved in the Kodak Express shop, and that sort of led, believe it or not, the Kodak Express shop led to getting into diving. I was at a Shark and Marine World at the Kodak Express shop, and it was a Friday evening, and um, the I think we had to close at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and it was one of those real boring evenings. It was pouring with rain. It was windy. It was about 7 o'clock in the evening. There was tumbleweed going through the retail center, and I was honestly just bored. And I walked out of the dive center, out of the Kodak Express shop, and I walked into the dive center, and I honestly was just killing time. I had no intention of doing anything except just killing time. And I always use this, and I suppose it's called like a sliding door moment. Is I walked into the dive center, and there was a guy behind the counter by the name of Dave Moldenhauer. And I walked into the dive center, and he looked up. He was reading a book. Those were the days before social media, and he looked up at me. And I've always said he could have asked the question that everybody asks. He could have said, "Hi, can I help?" And if you'd asked that question, I honestly would have said, "No, no, thank you. I'm just looking." And I would have walked around the dive center, walked out the door again, and that was it. But I walked in through the door and he said to me, "Hi, are you a scuba diver?" And so now I had to answer and, engage with him. And, you can't just say, "Oh, no, sorry, I'm just looking." Like, "No, I'm not a scuba diver." And he's like, "Oh, why are you not a scuba diver?" And so suddenly a conversation developed. And before I knew it, I had my phone out and I was phoning some mates to come on the Saturday morning to come and do a Discover scuba dive in the aquarium. And that's what we did. We, the next morning, went to the aquarium and I did a Discover scuba dive in the aquarium and absolutely, completely fell in love with it. And just thought to myself, wow, this is incredible. So signed up for my open water course, did my open water course, dived down at Allowal Shoal, um, did the launch through the river, which, somebody never having launched through the Horrocks River. That's pretty hairy. Um, did the dive and just completely fell in love with it. And then signed up for my advanced course, and the advanced course was over a long weekend in Mozambique. Went up to Mozambique, Ponta d'Ora, did my advanced course there, and I sat there on the beach and I just thought to myself, why haven't I done this before? This is what I want to do. And that evening, Dave was there, and he had this sort of grey pelican case full of fish books, and he sort of opened the fish books, and they're all dog-eared and watermarks on them. And we were filling in our log books, and he would open up the fish book, and he's like, "Oh, this is the fish we saw," and he'd tell us all about the fish and its mating habits and whatever, And I sat there enthralled. And I remember after that grabbing a doshem and going down onto the beach, and it was one of those perfect evenings. The sea was just calm, and the moonrise was just coming out of the ocean, and I sat there and I'm like, I want to be like Dave. I want to be a scuba instructor, and that was it. I signed up to become a scuba instructor, and I went down to Allowal Shoal, did an internship as a 30. How old was I? 35 years old, and did an internship at a dive center called Quo Vadis at Allowal Shoal, and learned everything. Took me until December to become an instructor. And so I did everything. I did my rescue course, did specialities, did the 5-6 months of an internship, and became an instructor. And then I went and we bought the dive center that I did the DSD in at a Shark Marine World. Went and bought that, and that's where it all started with the diving. And it's what I say to people is, if you're going to do something, do it. And I think it's pretty much like yourself, is jump in wholeheartedly. Don't have any reserves. If this is what you're doing, do it. Be committed to it. And when I decided to become an instructor, I didn't decide to become an instructor. I decided to become a course director. And I'm like, okay, once I'm an instructor, what's the quickest time I can take to be a course director? And that was at that stage 3 years. Sorry, but it wasn't just 3 years. It was 3 years, uh, 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 a shed load of courses you had to have taught. I think the minimum was about 150 courses to become a master instructor. So everything I did from the day I became an instructor was becoming a course director. That was in mind. And so my end goal was course director, and a course director can train other instructors. And I put my mind to it. I qualified as an instructor in the December, and 3 years and 2 or 3 months, it was in the March, I got accepted onto the course director course. And that's not, you can't just go and say, "Oh, I'm signing up for a course director course." There's a big application and a business plan, and you don't just get accepted onto the course. And I was invited to attend the course. And so went to Malaysia, Kota Kinabalu, did my course director training course there, and thoroughly enjoyed that again. And I think it almost harked back to sort of the military days, because I enjoyed training, I enjoyed teaching, I enjoyed being a mentor, I enjoyed imparting my knowledge, I enjoyed sharing knowledge, and that's what I enjoyed about teaching future instructors. Sharing that knowledge and giving them that knowledge.
Yeah, that's just to jump in there. I mean, that's certainly reflecting on what you've told me so far. I mean, that's a massive part of what you basically had spent, since leaving school. It's very much, you know, adventure, outdoors, and and really, yeah, training and managing people essentially. Been doing it for a long time.
Yeah, and I thoroughly loved it. And then owning a dive center, you have staff, and the staff are then wanting to teach all the courses because they got paid commissions and got paid for every course. So then I'm like, okay, well, what can I do that my staff can't do? So that's how I got into technical diving. I'm like, okay, I want to go to the next level because I have now staff. At one stage we had over 30 staff at the dive center. We were doing hundreds and hundreds of DSDs every month in the aquarium. We had 2 boats. We were launching every day. It was a big operation. Doing 1,500 certifications a year. It was massive. Training 40, 50 dive masters a year. Training 30, 40 instructors a year. So it was a big operation. But I wanted to do something more, and uh, I got into technical diving because I was doing a deep training course, and we were at 40 meters, and I had students, and I saw this ray that I'd never seen before. In I'd done hundreds and hundreds of dives, and I'd never seen this particular ray before. And so I saw the ray. I didn't have a camera or anything with me, so just sort of memorized it. And after the dive, I phoned Dennis King. You probably know Dennis King. He writes fish books and photographs fish. And I phoned Dennis, and I'm like, "Hey, Dennis, I've never seen this ray before," and described it to him. And he's like, "Oh, wow, that's the ornate sleeper ray, or the Electrolux Addisoni." And I'm like, "Oh, wow!" And he's like, "Oh, you're very lucky. It's only just been discovered. It's only just been named, and it was Mark Addison who discovered it off Animal Shoal. It's so rarely seen. You're one of few people to actually have seen it." And so I finished that, and I'm like, "Wow, that's so cool." I knew Mark Addison, and I'm like, "Wow, he's had a fish named after him. I want a fish named after me." And so I just sort of did some research, and I'm like, "Okay, if I'm going to find a fish, it's got to be deep, because in the shallow, everybody's seen the shallow fish. I've got to go deep to find fish and get it named after me." And that's how I got into technical diving, purely for egotistical, selfish reasons. Is I wanted to find a fish and have it named after me.
Intriguing. So and I mean, that's something which, again, so I met you in, I think, 2010 or 2000, yeah, somewhere around there. In fact, 2009, I think it was. And you were very much, I mean, you were heavily into the tech diving then. There was a whole big mission to, dive on the Rex, Durban's Ghost Fleet. Maybe you could just share a little bit about kind of
So
how that evolved.
so now I'd done my tech training. I did my tech training with Don Shirley up at Komati Springs, or Batkat. If he watches this, Andre will be upset that I said Batkat, but at Komati Springs. And um, and they came down to Durban, and we did some diving on some wrecks there. But my goal was still to go and find a fish. So because we'd been doing recreational diving, we hadn't gone and searched and looked for reefs beyond the 40-meter mark. And so I started to then go and look for deeper reefs, and I found this particular area at 60, 65 meters, where there were these nice big sort of square reefs. And so I started to map those reefs and plot them and have a look at them. And we just finished a dive on a 65-meter reef, and we were sat in the boat, and we were just chatting. And I glanced across at the fish finder, and I saw suddenly, sure, there was this activity on the fish finder with a whole lot of fish, and I'm like, "Oh, what is that?" And so I drove the boat over it. I'm like, "Wow, we're in the middle of nowhere. The reef is, this is sandy area according to the chart." And so I thought about it. I'm like, "This must be a wreck or something," And I looked at the charts. There was no mention of this. So saved the GPS, went to bed that evening, and woke up in the mornings like, "I've got to go and see what that is." And so try to phone some people to join me on a Monday morning, but everyone's like, "Oh, I've got to work. I've got to work." And I'm like, "I'm going." So got the tanks filled, took the skipper out and a support diver, Brad Wright, and went back to the wreck site, threw the hook over, thought, "Oh, wow, I've hooked the wreck." And so I'm like, "Okay, Brad, I'm going down, go and have what a look at it is, come back up again. You meet me at 30 meters. Brad wasn't qualified then for deep tech diving. Meet me at 30 meters, and we'll come up again together. And so did it. Dropped down the line, started to pull myself down the line, and Durban has this sort of layer. When I first went into the water, you could see tomorrow coming on. It was crystal clear. And I sort of hit 30 meters, hit this thermocline, and it was like somebody had switched off the lights. It went pitch black. And I remember putting myself down the line thinking, oh, what the hell are you doing, Patrick? What the hell are you doing? If I closed my eyes, I could literally see more. It was so dark. And I pull myself down this line, and I hit the ground at 65 meters, and the anchor is hooked onto a rock the size of a tennis ball. As far as I could see, which wasn't very far, it was like there was nothing. There was just this little rock sticking out of the sand, and it had hooked this rock, and that was it. And I'm like, oh no, this can't be true. So I'm like, so I sort of unhooked the anchor and sort of got myself neutrally buoyant. And as I was sort of fiddling with the anchor, I bumped into something, got a hell of a fright, turned around, and there was the wreck right behind me. So I swam over the top of the wreck down the line because the visibility was so bad, hadn't seen anything, and then bumped into this wreck that we'd found. And that was it. I dived it numerous times. You've dived it with me, the Umzumvubu or the Namakwa. And once I'd identified it after a lot of diving and a lot of photographs and a lot of research, discovered its most famous passenger was Winston Churchill. And he sort of wrote in his diary, he knows why it's called Umzumvubu. Umzumvu was Zulu for hippopotamus. It was like riding on the back of a hippopotamus. And so that was it. Fish were forgotten. I didn't need a fish named after me. And so, that's when I started doing deep exploration, looking for wrecks of Durban. And there are literally hundreds of wrecks off Durban. The downside is it drops very quickly. You can go out and it gradually drops to sort of 130, 140 meters, and then it drops off to 1,000 meters, as you get further out. So although there were lots of wrecks, those that were shallower were few and far between. So that's how I got into wreck diving. I bumped into a wreck by accident, and that was it. Fish forgotten. I'm going to find wrecks. And yeah, in that period, found 10 wrecks, one of which you were with me when we discovered that massive big caseon. I think it was. We still didn't identify what it was, but that was a brand
No,
new
we
piece
did,
of.
Patrick. I mean, that was pretty much a caisson that fell off the back of that
Yeah,
barge, right? I mean, remember,
yeah,
it was this
yeah.
mysterious circular, crazy the lust for rust.
Yeah, and then again, once you go beyond that 40 meters, it's different diving completely. Things, the error chain, recreational diving, you've got this massive big error chain. Suddenly when you're at 100 meters, your error chain becomes very small, very tight. And so everything's got to be more precise, more detailed, the planning more thorough, the backup plans more thorough. And that is all things that stand you in good stead with leadership. It's not just standing in front, winging it. It's the planning and preparation that goes into that moment in time. And so with the military background, the entrepreneurship, and then the deep technical diving and the discovering of wrecks, sort of has led to where you and I are at this moment in time. And there are so many stories we've got to share. Maybe for another time, of course, for another time. But you and I, we've discovered wrecks together. We've dived to, suddenly discovering we're at 140 meters in a cave looking for a coelacanth. Um, we've trusted the rule of three, which we can talk about in detail. So it's been an incredible journey that I've been on, and I've met incredible people along the way, and all of that has formed me into who I am today, I suppose, forged under pressure.
Oh, it's fantastic, Patrick. I mean, that's definitely filled in a lot of the gaps for me, and I agree. I'm excited to definitely unpack, some of the expeditions we've been on, the coelacanth diving, the wreck diving in future podcasts, and sort of, explore how we dealt with specific situations. Because I think going forward, it's important to get more into, specific high pressure situations that we have dealt with, and then take the learnings out and share those. And then also going forward, I'm very excited to. We must definitely get Don Shirley on the show. I'm sure there's a number of people we can think of that across the board that we could get on to help share their stories of how they've been able to not only deal with like high pressure situations in specific instances, but also high pressure situations which last a lot longer. Trying to build a business that doesn't take that's something that puts you under pressure for a long period of
Yeah,
time, right?
and it's not luck. It's not
No.
luck, just form. Yes, maybe the idea comes by luck, but it's hard work. It's damn hard work, and I suppose that's where we both are in our life. Is we have had these stories formed under pressure, and now it's time to share them. And I've said to you, I've shared that story on LinkedIn about when three things went wrong on a dive that we were on. We were going to dive the Otis submarine, which we had discovered at 105 meters, and we had the rule of threes, and three things went wrong, and we aborted and called the dive. And if we hadn't have listened to those signals, if we hadn't have listened to what was going on around us, there was a potential that you wouldn't have survived that dive. There was a real potential that you wouldn't have survived that dive. And so those are lessons that are worth sharing. I think that's why we, when we were chatting, that's why we formed this podcast, pressure tested.
No, brilliant. Well, thanks, Patrick. I really enjoyed that, and yeah, a lot of gaps filled in for me. So I look forward to picking up where we left off today, and perhaps next week we can go into some of the specifics of the expeditions that we've actually been on.
Yeah, brilliant. I think so. And we can take one at a time and go through them, go through the preparation, the lessons learned, and the lessons that we can share. That would be amazing.
Sounds good. All right, Patrick. Thanks for your time. I look forward
Thanks,
to chatting
Roger.
again next week.
Brilliant. See you next week.
Okay, Pat. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye bye.